I'm a photographer, so I spoke to Eleanor about doing this and obviously said I needed some screens. Actually, the screens were just to watch the football on. I'm not going to be showing any photographs today, I'm just going to be sharing stories. But I want to, well, first off, thank Eleanor for helping bring this all together. You have a very grand chair, I'm quite jealous of that. And I want to thank the guys from Massive Attack for also making this happen. As I said, I'm a storyteller, but there's no point telling stories if there's nobody to listen. And one of the things that we've been working on, collaborating on over a couple of years, was showing visuals in the show. But for me, I thought, what's the point of somebody just seeing a photograph on stage if it doesn't lead them to action? So one of the things we wanted to do is get some speakers, and also on your way out, you'll find we've done a free newspaper with some of the stories in the photographs you'll be seeing on stage today. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm still slightly disappointed because every time Massive Attack says they want to collaborate, I think this is my moment to sing. It's yet to happen yet, but it will happen. And one of the things you'll see in this newspaper is the slogan, "No More War." It's a very naive, simplistic slogan. It's something, in fact, somebody sent me a tweet. They said, the problem with you is you're a liberal, anti-war idealist. I thought, that's a strange insult. But what a world we live in where that is seen as an insult. I am simply saying that war should not be the way that we settle differences. It should not be the way that we carry out foreign policy. It should not always be the first answer. I started out as a witness. I started out with the simple idea that my job was to document conflict. And as the years went on, I started to question, is that enough? I have witnessed, I have documented murder, killings, rape, sexual abuse, the maiming of children, the destroying of homes. How can you witness that and stay silent? If you saw that being done to your neighbors, if you saw that in the street where you lived and you stayed silent, if you did not say anything against it, you would be implicit in those crimes. And after 10 years of witnessing conflict, I realized I could stay silent no longer, that I had to speak out, that I had to do more, which is why I formed a charity, an organization. Its simple purpose is to support communities to rebuild themselves. As Nimco said, people have the skills, the abilities. It is our job just simply to stand with them and help them rebuild. And as part of that, I have to stand against war and all that it represents. But as I said, my main role is as a storyteller. I hate the phrase that gets used a lot. People talk about my work and they say, you're brilliant, you give voice to people. I'm like, that's bullshit. They have voices. The people I document have voices. My job is simply to make sure their voices are heard. And I was thinking about what I was going to say today, and it's funny how often when a talk's coming up, something happens, somebody shares a story with me, and suddenly it all makes sense. So what I want to do is tell you a story about a woman called Olive. I was in Rwanda a couple of weeks ago. I was doing a story on women survivors of the genocide and how they've rebuilt their lives. I don't work like normal photographers or journalists. I normally turn up at somebody's house. The first thing I always do is cook with the families. I love cooking, and it's a great way to build a relationship with people. So often I turn up, they're told a journalist or photographer is coming, people start to share their stories, and I say, no, stop, stop, stop. I just want to cook with you. And they kind of carry on telling their stories. And I said, no, no, really, I just want to cook. And they think, okay, this is weird. There's this guy with one arm, come all the way from London, and he just wants to cook with me. But I'm like, no, that's what we're going to do. It's a great excuse. I get to eat. But it's a way you build friendships. Because I will never photograph anybody who I don't count as a friend. I'm a guardian of their stories. And how can you know somebody's story if you haven't built that relationship first? So I turn up, I meet Olive, and I said, can I come back tomorrow and we'll cook? She's like, yeah, of course, let's do it. I also found out it was her 50th birthday. So I turned up with a cake. We made some great fried chicken, nice tomato sauce, chips, rice, big on the carbs. It was a good meal. And after we finished eating, Olive sat down with me, and she held my hand, and she said, now I want to tell you my story. In 1994, years of civil war and violence in Rwanda came to a climax with the genocide. The Hutu government, the president was killed, and that was an excuse, a reason for starting the genocide and the killing of anywhere between 700,000 and 1 million Tutsis in the space of 100 days. On the day the genocide, or the evening before it started, Olive, who was 24 at the time, was expecting her third child. Her best friend, Clementine, who was Hutu, Olive was Tutsi, took her to the hospital. It should have been a day for celebration. Quite literally, as Olive was giving birth, they heard the explosion in the distance, which was the president's plane being shot down. On the radio, they started to hear calls, people saying, this is time to kill the Tutsis, time to kill the cockroaches. Olive obviously was preoccupied with giving birth, but she knew trouble was coming. Her best friend Clementine said, I'll go back to the village, I'll make sure everything's okay, I'll let you know what's going on. So Clementine returned to the village. That night, as Olive was in the hospital, the Hutu militias attacked her village. They killed her 2 children, they killed her husband, they killed her parents, they killed her in-laws, they killed her brothers, they killed her sisters. They killed every living family member that she had. At that moment of celebration with her new baby in the hospital, everyone she loved died. The next day she got the news, but at the same time, already by then, this small hospital being run by nuns was surrounded by the militias. They had their machetes. They would scrape them on the ground to make a noise. They would appear at the windows and go like this. The nuns did their best to keep the militias out. For 2 days, they managed to do it. After 3 days, they turned to the Tutsis hiding there in that hospital and said, we cannot protect you anymore. The next day, the militias came in and they grabbed the Tutsis. Olive, and she says she regrets this moment, but in the panic, she protected her child, her baby, by the only one way she could. As they dragged her out, she left the baby on the bed. The baby had no identity. It had no past to say whether it was Hutu or Tutsi. She hoped by abandoning her baby, it might survive. She was dragged with 1,200 other people into the market. There, the militias, with their knives, started to kill everybody. She threw herself on the ground in the hope that when the bodies were on top of her, she might be able to hide. She spent 3 days hiding under those bodies. Of the 1,200 people in that market square, only 10 people survived that massacre. In the night, she went down to the large river just outside Kigali, and she hid in the water. She thought, I'd be safe here for a couple of days. She would watch on the other riverbank as the militias burnt houses, raped, and killed. At night, she would sneak out onto the riverbank and sleep there and spend the day up to here in the water. She was there for 1 month. When finally that area was liberated, she had insects that had burrowed into her legs. She showed me the scars. She was white, she had malaria. She was quite literally on death's door. But miraculously, her stubbornness meant that she was still alive. The Rwandan Free Forces took her to a hospital. She spent 2 months recovering. At the end of that 2 months, the first thing she knew, or first thing she had to do, was to return to her village and bury her family. But when she got back to her village, nobody knew where the bodies had been taken. The few survivors, both Hutu and Tutsi, knew nothing of where the bodies were. There was nothing left. But what she did find was 6 children, 6 babies, and very young children that were distant relatives, one a cousin's son, another an in-law's daughter. So she adopted these 6 kids and moved to Kigali. She hated herself. She thought she was responsible for the death of her family and her children. What she didn't know is she had PTSD. She was suffering from survivor guilt. So she began to work as a prostitute. She thought that's what she deserved and the only way she could support these 6 kids. She had no other family to turn to. She actually said to me, I felt like I was a dustbin. She goes, each man that slept with me, in my mind, was the perpetrator. Each man that had sex with me was the person that killed my family. And for 10 years, that's how she lived. Because that's the reality of living with that legacy of war and conflict. It's not something that ends with peace treaties when agreements are made between warring groups. War and its impact stays with survivors forever. But after 10 years, a local NGO started talking to her, and they gave her psychological support. She made a small help group with some other sex workers, and little by little, she realized the death of her children, abandoning her baby, the death of her family was not her fault, that she shouldn't hate herself. And eventually she found the strength to move out of Kigali and try and build a new life for her family, these 6 children that she had adopted. An NGO managed to find her a home, but it was just a few miles away from where her family had been killed. So she was there, and every day she said, I would see the people that killed my family walking by me in the street. Some had already left prison, some had been given an amnesty. But each day she would see the people that had killed her children. She would pass them in the market. She would pass them in the street. But she made a decision. She said, the only way I could live in that situation was to forgive them. And that's what she did. Each one of them she found and forgave them. And some of the killers started coming to her house and growing vegetables for her and started to support her family. One night, there was a knock on her door. She opened it, and one of the killers was stood there. She was terrified. But the man that was stood there said, I have come to show you where we buried your family. 15 years after her family was massacred, this man took her to an unmarked grave where the government came. They found 350 bodies in that mass grave. As Olive said, everybody in her community was finally able to bring closure, to bury their dead. And for her, the only reason that happened is because she forgave the people that killed her family. And there's a little postscript to this story. I mentioned her friend Clementine, who was Hutu, who had taken her to the hospital. 4 years after the genocide in 1998, there was a knock on her door in the house where she lived in Kigali. She opened it, and there was Clementine. Clementine said, Olive, I've been looking for you. I thought you were dead. I assumed you'd been killed, and then I heard a rumor. And Clementine had actually gone and lived in a refugee camp in Congo and had just returned. But she said, as soon as I heard the story that you were alive, I had to find you. But it's taken me a year. But here you are. And they embraced. And then Clementine said to Olive, the reason I had to find you is because I have your son. And she had gone to the hospital during the massacre, and she'd found the baby on the bed. And she knew it was her friends, this Hutu and this Tutsi, these enemies. She had taken the child and brought it up as her own in the refugee camps, and had now returned her son to Olive. When I left, I said to Olive, what can I do for you? What can I do? And she said one thing. She said, tell my story. Share this story. And do all you can to make sure that what happened in Rwanda never happens again. And she pointed at my t-shirt, And she said, keep telling them again and again, no more war. No more war. Thank you.